Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening to this. My name is Ian Gotts. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Elements.cloud. Delighted that you can join us for the final episode of the first series of Best Run Org. And we're changing tack a little bit this time. We're going to look more strategically about the centre of excellence. Depending on whether you're British or American, then is it centre or centre? But the same principles are true no matter where you are in the world. And I want to dive into what a centre of excellence is. So before we do that, let's just think about why we're implementing Salesforce. Whether you're a consultant, an admin, a developer, the CRM owner, or the head of the centre of excellence, the goal clearly is increasing the return on investment from Salesforce. It's clearly a strategic platform. You're spending a lot of money on it. It's a major investment. And therefore, we need to make sure we get the best value out of that spend. And the digital transformation agenda has now been accelerated. COVID-19 means that what was a 5-year plan has become a 5-month or even a 5-week plan. And as we work out the best way of operating in this new world, the organization, the business needs to be very agile. And that means that we need to make sure that Salesforce is equally agile, and that means more frequent, more rapid implementations to make sure that the changes that we're making to Salesforce are supporting the business rather than slowing it down. But rapid change always increases risks. So what we need to do is increase the Salesforce adoption levels. We need more end users logging in, using the applications that we built for them, and make sure that they are getting maximum value out of them. And if they aren't, then a mechanism for telling us how we can improve it and how we can change it. I make a very simple comment, which is if I've got 100 users using Salesforce or 100 licenses, and only 50 of them are using Salesforce in the way we expected, the way to double the return on investment is get the other 50 using it properly. So we need to really focus on, are we building the right applications? Are we building them in the way that the end users want to use them? Because sometimes they surprise us. And then how do we have a mechanism for them telling us how they want it to change? The second thing is we need to accelerate that implementation cycle. If they suggest some changes, then they can't expect 60 days before that change makes it in. If it's a reasonably easy, low-risk change, we should be able to get that in the next day or two through a more expedited implementation cycle. Clearly, if it's complex, then we need to make sure it goes through development, through to UAT, implementation, integration test, sandboxes, UAT, and then through to production. But nevertheless, we need to accelerate that overall implementation lifecycle. And finally, we need to reduce delivery risk. Salesforce is now strategic. We can't afford to have unplanned downtime because we made a change and something in the org broke. So 3 words: adoption, agility, and trust. So those of you who've listened to some of the other webinars, and again, thank you for joining us for those, you've seen this implementation lifecycle. The idea that at the bottom left you have analyze, where we're pulling in feedback from the operate phase, we're capturing requirements, we're mapping processes and building data models to validate the requirements. We're looking at the technical impact by looking at the org impact analysis. We're developing user stories, and then those user stories are pushed into the build phase where we can configure code and document, underlined, document the changes we're making, test, then through to deliver, backing up the metadata, deploying through the deployment pipeline, loading data, releasing to production, and then in production, monitoring how well the system's performing, monitoring how often people are logging in. Clearly back up and restore, and then we're back into, are the end users following the applications in the way that A, we expected, but B, also maybe the regulators, if you're in a highly regulated environment, the regulators you require you to. And then finally training and feedback, and then we start the cycle again. So that's a quick sprint through the implementation lifecycle. So the question is, where does the Centre of Excellence sit? The Centre of Excellence essentially is the wrapper around this to make sure that we can accelerate this implementation lifecycle and increase the maturity of the way that we develop our Salesforce org, and also the way that it interacts with other systems. Salesforce is no longer an island, it's connected to other applications. And therefore we need to make sure that the Centre of Excellence drives Salesforce in concert with the other applications inside our organizations. So the rest of the presentation and the discussion is going to be about the Centre of Excellence. At the end, there are some resources which include links to the Centre of Excellence Success Community, links to the LinkedIn Success Community, and also a COE Lounge which we run, which is a talking shop, the opportunity for people to have discussions. Because the one thing that is very clear is that the Centre of Excellence is a relatively new concept inside the Salesforce world. I would make the point, though, that it's not a new concept in the rest of the world. So what we're talking about is our solved problems. We're not having to make this up from first principles just because it's Salesforce. Clearly, there are some ways that we will tweak that Centre of Excellence because of the power of Salesforce. But many of the principles I want to talk about are well known and proven. I think the discussions that are having in Salesforce customers and in Salesforce corporate is how does the Centre of Excellence work best when it's applied to a Salesforce implementation. So I'm a bit of a car nut, so I wanted to describe how we got to the problem we've got to in terms of those three pictures. The 1999 humble Ford Focus, the Aston Martin Vantage GTE race car, and a rather sad-looking Aston Martin there. So I've been a Salesforce customer since 2001. We were probably one of the first customers in the UK. Salesforce launched in 1999, and it was a tactical application. It was a Salesforce automation system. It probably had a relatively small number of people using it. It had a relatively small scope. Back in 1999, 2000, when we joined, there were 5 objects: the lead, account, contact, case, and opportunity. I think they probably were. There were no sandboxes. There was no app exchange. But we all saw the enormous power of the cloud and the capabilities of this highly flexible platform where we could build anything out. And in fact, back in 2001, Adrian King, the COO of the company I ran there, who's now joined me in the COO of Elements.cloud, he said, right, if it exists, it will exist inside Salesforce, and we built out 285 custom objects. So we were probably one of the leaders in terms of pushing the platform. And in fact, we were one of Salesforce reference customers. That was back in 1999. Roll the clock forward 21 years, and we now have a massively capable platform. We have the App Exchange, we have multiple clouds, we have both declarative and code. We have MuleSoft for integrating to third-party systems. So Salesforce has put an enormous amount of energy and money behind R&D, but also mergers and acquisitions, acquiring companies, to build it a massively capable platform. But sadly, what I see is that we haven't moved a great deal from the citizen developers, the accidental admins with an imposter syndrome, who we saw back in 1999. We now have a massively capable application, but we're not looking after it in the way that, say, an Aston Martin GTA race car. We're not positioning ourselves to win races. We're still thinking of it as a Ford Focus, which is, it'll get 4 or 5 of us to the shops and back. And if I look at all confessions, I see a number of orgs that are in that sorry state of that Aston in the picture. It's called uncontrolled agility. We've got so many objects, so many custom fields, so many dashboards. We really don't know how to basically manage our way and get the agility back that we lost. So where we need to get to is this target state, both agile and compliant. And what we're seeing is quite a big skills and tools gap. Clearly the Centre of Excellence, which is what I'm talking about, strong analysis skills, strong DevOps. Now, those principles, those skills, those tools, we are starting to see used and adopted by, say, some of the more mature Salesforce customers in terms of, not mature in terms of their Salesforce org, but mature in terms of their thinking. I'm passionate about helping people understand the skills you need to run a really well-run org. I'm very fortunate that I don't have to look very far. Elements.cloud has probably the best run org on the planet. We have a case study that you can look at in terms of the way we run our org. No, we're not a massive company, but we have applied all the principles of running a really well-run org that the largest companies and the best-run companies inside Salesforce do. And the reason for that is that we have invested and we understand the value of a COE, of doing good business analysis of DevOps. So what I want to do is spend some time thinking about what the Centre of Excellence is. And here we have a list of items that almost the shopping list of things that would be inside of Centre of Excellence. And I know this feels like a little bit of overkill. I mean, most people, the answer is seriously. I'm trying to run an org here. You want me to do all these other things as well? I think you'll find that many of the things that we're talking about, you probably already do. The question is, how do we drive up the level of excellence of those activities? So even if you're small, you think you're fairly immature as an org, you don't have any budget, you still need to go and make sure that you understand each of these different activities. And I think the important point is they are skills, not roles. You can phase them in as you grow the organization. And the last point is they are solved problems. None of these are things that you look at and go, okay, no one's ever done this ever before. I'm the first person who's ever created this, has had to think about metadata management, who's had to think about prototyping, who understands what a PMO is. So what I want to go through is each of these different activities and just talk about some of the things that are involved here. And then we'll look at, based on the size of the organization, how important are each of these different activities. So the first one is vision. What is the strategic vision of Salesforce and its integration into the other systems around your organization? Is it, oh, it's something the sales guys use in a corner, or is it a strategic platform which is being invested in heavily? And what's the vision longer term for where Salesforce will grow to? Your vision, I mean, I know the vision of the Salesforce account exec is that you will buy every cloud that exists, but what's your vision? What's your CIO's vision? What's your CEO's vision of where Salesforce fits? Is it the customer 360 view across the whole of your different business units? So that vision is something which needs to be locked down, documented, and therefore understood by the people who are both using it, but the people who are developing it. So that sort of strategic roadmap. Leadership is something different. Leadership is, do you have the support of senior executives? Do you have a steering committee who will help you build the business case, who will help you sign off the budget that you need to do what is described in the vision? So leadership is about the organizational structures you put around your org. Is there a change control board? Is there a steering committee? Who is the business owner? If you had to point on one person and say, this is the person who will fight for Salesforce, who is that one person? So the next point is governance. So that is a mechanical task. This is, how do we manage the risks? How do we manage the business case? How do we drive return on investment? How do we control the overall scope of the roadmap of Salesforce? We've got a vision, we've got our leadership. The leadership now needs the tools to say, okay, this is what's important. This is what's going to be delivered by Q3. This is where the functionality that we need by Q4 with the integrations to, I know, Workday or maybe Oracle Financials. So that's governance. Governance is is the overall management of not just Salesforce, but the Salesforce program, which includes people, process, and technology, managing the people change, managing the operational change, but obviously managing Salesforce and technology. Change control is getting even more tactical. That is then, how are we managing the requirements, the feedback, how are we managing that backlog of changes so that we are prioritizing it so it fits with the vision. How are we making sure that if there are changes coming which we're not going to implement, the people who raise those changes understand why? And have we got some audit trail where we can look back and go, okay, are we on track? Are we doing the things we said we would do? Do we have version control over documentation? Do we have version control over our training material? Do we have version control over the changes we're making to Salesforce? So when I think about Signature of Excellence, don't think about a narrow scope of me building Salesforce, but it's about the Salesforce program, people, process, and technology. Methodology. Methodology is, what is my implementation approach? Have we documented, written down the way that we implement? This is the way we do requirements workshops. This is how we capture and do the analysis. This is how we validate requirements. This is how we, and again, I think about that whole implementation life cycle. What are the steps that you go through to get from feedback all the way around the life cycle through to delivered back to feedback? Now, we can help you there. I said Elements is one of the best run orgs on the planet. We already have documented all our processes, not surprisingly, but we also make those available to anybody. Anybody can look at them, pick them apart, use them, change them, but we have what we could call a straw man there. You've got something you could start with and go, okay, if we don't have anything, then let's look at what Elements did and then decide how we would change that to make it work for ourselves. The next is standards. So, I mean, lots of people will be going, oh, really, standards? Standards are really important. And again, it's back to size of organization. How light to touch or how heavy does this need to be? At a minimum, it should be, what's the naming standards for new fields? We've got examples in the Org Confessions book of a field called shoe size and one called size of shoe. What are the naming standards for fields? What are the naming standards for list views? What are the naming standards for reports? So we don't end up with this bloat of, I can't find what I want, I don't know what the naming standard is, I will just go and create another one. What are the naming standards for your opportunities, for your accounts? We've taken quite an unusual approach inside Salesforce, having been around for a while. Our accounts all are the URL. So if you are Ford, it's Ford.com. It's not Ford, Ford Inc., Ford Motor Company, Ford MC. So we don't end up with any difficulty in terms of duplication of accounts because we have the URL of the company. That also means that every time we have any new users get added to Elements, they automatically get added to our Salesforce instance. Because it's been driven off email address, they can be automatically populated. So again, there's another little example of a standard that you could set. And obviously standards is way broader than that. What's the standard for training material? What's the standard for your analysis? Again, these are the things that you need to put in place to make sure that your life, as you implement Salesforce, becomes easier. Metadata management. Obviously something very close to our heart because that's what the Elements does really well. We pull all the metadata, we build all the analysis with a place where you can document your metadata. Excel spreadsheets are not databases. If you're going to do metadata management, you need to think about a proper database. If it's not Elements, there are a couple of other companies out there. But please think about how you manage your metadata, because that is where you will end up with a, if you don't get this right, this is where the technical debt grows and you kill the agility of the organization. If I look through the Org Confessions, the top 4 issues are business analysis, why did we make those changes to the metadata? Documentation, how do we document the metadata? And the third one is architecture, which is how the metadata relates to itself. Which feeds very nicely into the next point, which is architecture. Again, back to Org Confessions, the number of problems that we see is in orgs because they haven't thought about the architecture before they launch in. That means an understanding about the data model. It needs an understanding about the way you're building automation, the way that you're thinking about performance. I'm just trying to think of one Org Confession. Product object with that had 40 lookup fields. right? That's just going to kill performance. So thinking about the architecture up front is really important. Implementing personal accounts sounded like a great idea, but very difficult to unpick. The classic example of architecture is, I decided I'm going to build a house. No one decided whether it had 1 or 5 floors. I thought it was a 1-floor building, so we built it. Then the guys came along and said, well, actually, how are we going to put floor 2, 3, 4, and 5 on when there's nowhere for the stairs? No one told me about needing another floor. So that the architecture in terms of building a house is just the same in terms of the architecture when you're building Salesforce. And what's great is that there's now an increased focus within Salesforce around architecture. There's obviously the certified architecture programs, the certifications, and there's a lot more work going into the training on architecture. Change management. So this is not just the changes of Salesforce. Change management in these terms is the change management of the organization. So the people change. So we've decided we're going to implement a different way of running opportunities. That will have an impact on the sales teams. It may have an impact on finance. So understanding the business operations impact, and then how we're going to train people so that they can understand how to get their job done, where Salesforce may be a large or a small part. So change management is way broader than just, can I train people on Salesforce screens? I have my head in my hands when people say, we're about to implement Lightning. Does anybody have any training material for Lightning screens? Hang on. If you're implementing Lightning, surely you are using Lightning to drive a better way of operating, which means you need to help your end users understand how Salesforce is going to improve an end-to-end business process, which is maybe around service or around sales. This is not myopic focus on, we can make Salesforce better. We actually need to make the business operation better, supported by Salesforce. PMO stands for Program or Project Management Office. This is the team or the skills of not necessarily building Gantt charts in project management tools, but understanding how you're controlling the overall project. Nowadays, with agile approaches, we look at things in smaller chunks. We don't have massive teams building Gantt charts that get printed out on huge printers and posted on the wall. We've changed the way we work now, but that doesn't mean that we aren't considering what's going into different releases, how we're going to do our training. So there's a project management type capability that's required there. The bigger the organization, the bigger the PMO needs to be, particularly if you're coordinating different groups. If you may have multiple orgs inside your company, you may have multiple business units using the same org. So there's a degree of coordination. Tooling is, what tools do you need to go and manage your Salesforce operation? What tools are you going to be using to manage the whole of the Center of Excellence? What tools you can do to be managing change management for metadata management? So this needs to be a conscious decision. You may say, we have no budget, we accept that actually our people are cheap and therefore we're going to use Excel spreadsheets. I think that's the wrong answer, because I think you can build a business case for proper tooling. But if that's a decision, let's make it a chosen decision, not one where you say, well, we just backed our way into it and well, we never did anything about it and we're stuck with where we are. And the last item on here is prototyping. Again, probably more appropriate to the larger organizations, but the Center of Excellence often is the place where teams are building proof of concept prototypes to inspire the business units for what is possible. Maybe they're taking ideas from a particular business unit, what they've built in their org, pulling it back, turning it into a prototype that everybody could use. So it's there about inspiring people about what could be used in Salesforce. So this feels like a long laundry list of things to do. And as I said, it's skills, not roles. It's phased. So therefore, if you're smaller, then maybe some of these things are a lighter touch, and I'll pick up on that in a moment. But fundamentally, these are solved problems. Every one of these things I'm talking about, I've been around for the last, 30 years when I was running my biggest programs inside Accenture. All these things still existed. Maybe not quite the same way. Technology has moved on, but not massively. So is there a benefit? So 10K Advisors did a survey called the Project to Program Survey, and they identified that those organizations, those Salesforce customers who said they had a very high ROI, 91% of those said they had a Salesforce Center of Excellence. Those who count themselves as well run, the A players rather than B or C, 82% of those said they had a Center of Excellence. So again, the top players are saying this is important. You are spending a lot of money on Salesforce. You need to make sure that it generates way more return than you've spent on it. And therefore, these principles I'm talking about are a way of actually driving up that ROI. So I've talked about phasing. If we think about a small team, a small Salesforce implementation, so small, medium, and large doesn't mean necessarily the number of end users. It may be, but it also is the level of complexity, the strategic importance. So small means it's a small admin team. It could be a solo admin. There's probably a limited development resource, maybe less than 100 users, and there is quite a narrow focus. It's the sales team use it. It's the service team use it. It probably isn't considered a strategic part of the IT platform. The CIO doesn't care about it and worry about it every day. So if we look here, the vision probably is fairly limited, a white dot. You still need leadership. You still need an owner. Really important, no matter what size, you still need an owner. Governance, change control methodology, you need at least something in place. You're still spending a significant amount of money, even if it's only 100 users. That's a significant spend. And therefore, you need to make sure you have some governance, change control, and you certainly need some form of documented implementation approach. Standards can be fairly light touch. Ideally, the more the better, but it's fairly light touch. The two things which you cannot get away with is metadata management and architecture. People are going, oh, of course you'd say that, Ian, you've got a metadata management product. No. We built the metadata management product because it's really, really important. Otherwise, you end up with an org that's completely out of control and you've killed all the agility. You need to put some form of management of metadata, which means documentation and analysis, so you have some chance of delivering releases which don't break the org. That's table stakes. You cannot be making changes and having unexpected consequences, no matter how small you are. You can't skimp on architecture. If you don't deal with architecture when you're small and you have any aspirations of that org growing, it will kill you as you get bigger. You need to bring those architecture skills in. So, but you may not have an architect on site. So go to some of these organizations who can provide some architecture skills on an hourly or a daily basis. But those architecture decisions that you make up front will come back to haunt you. I can guarantee that, not just because it's Halloween. Again, change management, you need to think about how your end users are going to change their business operations, the way they work, the way they measured, the way they use Salesforce. PMO could be a fairly light touch. Tooling, again, as I said, some conscious decisions. We have decided we will not spend money on DevOps. We have decided we will not spend money on metadata management, and we accept the consequences. We accept the effort it will take to use manual activities to get around the things which had tools because we can't afford it. So again, I'd urge you to make conscious decisions about the tools you need. Are you going to use a project management tool? Are you going to use some sort of program management? So that tooling decision, again, needs to be a conscious decision. As a small organization, prototyping probably isn't relevant. There's no sharing between orgs. You have one org. A medium-sized org, you probably have business analysts, admins, and development teams. You may even have a systems integrator engaged with you, supporting the build. You're probably now between 500 and 1,000 users, and suddenly you can start to see the vision is more important because we're now connecting to other systems. It's becoming more strategic. Standards become really important because now we've got multiple teams. We've got admins, we've got business analysts, we've got developers. They are all touching the org. They are all building training material, looking at training material. So those standards suddenly become really important the moment you get beyond a couple of people. Clearly, metadata management architecture is still important. Change management, becomes more important because, again, we're dealing with more people. You're starting to put in place a PMO. You're starting to think about how you coordinate these different teams, how you coordinate the changes, how you're going to communicate those. Again, tooling. Very difficult of an organization that sort of size to not have a formal approach to tooling and decisions about what you're going to do. Prototyping could be yellow, could be white. We've said it's unlikely to have a great deal of prototyping when you're medium. When you get to large, clearly all these things are important. And by large, I mean multi-org, so maybe more than one org for your organization, an org by business unit, an org by country, however you've organized that. Or you may have one org, multi-cloud, but one org where you have multiple teams accessing it. I heard, talking to a customer the other day, 26 different teams operating on one org. Go the other way, customer talking to them, they had 55 orgs and were trying to consolidate down to 4 because they had 4 business units. So the challenge is that of large organizations in terms of, do we throw the org away and rebuild because the technical debt is so great? How do we consolidate orgs? How do we split orgs? We've just acquired another company, so we've now got another Salesforce org. What do we do with that? So you can see now that the Center of Excellence plays a critical role in almost being air traffic controller here, trying to actually control how the different orgs are working together and genuinely being the Center of Excellence, pulling out best practice and from one org and saying, let's apply that to those other orgs. Methodology, standards, architecture, change management all come to the fore. So I wanted to look at how well supported this is by both training and tools. So if I look at Salesforce Trailhead and certifications, a white dot says, yeah, doing some. So there are a couple of trails that you can find a few presentations about governance and webinars that are being run. So starting to do more there. Change control the same. You'll find a few webinars, no certifications around it. There are a couple of fairly light trailhead badges for that. Architecture clearly is where Salesforce is doubling down. There's the architecture certification. There's a lot more effort going into different architecture training programs. There's the architect's blog that Salesforce runs. There are a number of groups now running architect Saturdays, architect success communities. So architecture, and there's a mascot. Ruth, the elephant, is the architecture mascot. So again, a lot of energy being put into that, which is fantastic. Change management inside Trailhead is really devoted to how do I train Salesforce screens rather than a broader change management. Prototyping, yeah, a lot there in terms of prototyping. There's some great stuff that came out of the Ignite program around how to get prototypes, how to get people inspired. I would suggest Dreamforce is a fantastic example of prototyping. The ideas that are being brought up at Dreamforce, at the World Tours, in terms of inspiring into what is possible with Salesforce, is a form of prototyping. If I think about Elements.Cloud for a moment, we play a role in governance. Clearly, change control in terms of changes to process, change to metadata, documentation, that's a core of what we do. In terms of methodology, how do you implement Salesforce? Elements is a way of documenting that methodology to get everyone on the same page. Not just us, but we're doing it. We've got customers doing it. We've got some of the big systems integrators are now saying, okay, let's take our methodology and put it into Elements so we can actually drive consistency across all our programs. Standards, whilst we don't enforce standards, clearly we're a place where you can start to manage those standards and see those standards coming to life. Metadata management, yeah, heart and soul of what we do, alongside the process piece. In terms of architecture, you can draw ERDs, which are data models. You can connect those data models back to metadata. So whilst architecture is a lot more about the skills, we provide tooling support for that. Change management, absolutely. That's our in-app help. That's our processes that can be delivered to any end user to make sure they understand what they're doing. So interesting. I ended up picking up a support call late at night It was an Australian university. I happened to pick the call up. It was about 7 or 8 at night. And we worked through some of the questions they had. We needed to raise a case. And I couldn't remember how to do that. So I went to our case object. I clicked on the button. There was a process that says, this is how you raise a case for a particular situation. And I stepped my way through and I followed the instructions. I successfully raised a case, having never done it before. That's change management in action. I'd never done it before. I needed to do it. And I managed to do it successfully with no help from anybody else. And again, last point there, tooling. Obviously, Elements is one of the tools that we believe that a COE needs. DevOps, let me just pick off the other two very quickly. DevOps. So DevOps is something, development operations, is certainly getting a lot more momentum and noise inside Salesforce. People are recognizing that change sets really don't do it, and that people need a more formal way of managing changes to Salesforce through the deployment pipeline. So tools like Copado, who Elements is tightly integrated within, are arguably the leader there. And they are managing change control of metadata. They are engaged in, obviously, metadata management because they're pushing the metadata around the deployment pipeline. Clearly, they're tooling. And if you're doing any prototyping, then, yeah, to get that cycle, get prototypes managed and delivered quickly, you need a very clear DevOps cycle. So again, some clear touch points between ourselves and Copado. But again, if you forget the tooling, you need a DevOps process. You need it documented. If you're using change sets, you still need to make sure you have a formal approach for doing that. The last one on the list is program management. So that's broader than just project management. This is not about building Gantt charts, but how do I manage the overall program? What's the roadmap look like? What are the key phases? Where does Salesforce fit with the other systems that are in the IT landscape? So what are the key touch points as those systems get improved or upgraded or even replaced? Clearly, governance, program management touches governance because that's the link back to the roadmap. And obviously, change control, program management is a key part of that in terms of the process for managing that roadmap and the changes that go into it. Lightish touch around change management. Again, the overall program needs, one of the streams is change management. It's at the heart of the PMO, depending on how much project management capability you need. But again, it's not just project, it's program. So this is not about, this is the Salesforce project, these are the 5 tasks, this is my Gantt chart. This is about the overall program with multiple themes. This is the people theme, this is the technology theme, this is the process theme. This is the communication program that we have to put in place. So it's broader than just a quite narrow focus around project. And clearly you need to decide what tools, if any, you want to put in place for program management. There's a lot to take in here. There's very little that's well documented in a consistent way around the Salesforce ecosystem. We are going to remedy that. A piece of work that we are currently doing is building out the COE reference manual, the COE book. I mean, rather like, this book here called Mastering Salesforce DevOps by a friend of mine, Andrew Davis. Great book around the heart and soul of DevOps. I'm not suggesting we're going to write a book this big, but there's certainly enough information there in different locations. We need to pull it together to say, what does it take to run a COE? So some key takeaways here. First of all, the principles of a COE are relevant to every project. It's just how light a touch, how heavy a touch. If you say, don't worry, I'm small, we'll do COE later, some of those things which should have been done when you were small will come back and bite you. Metadata management, architecture, change management. So this is something you should be thinking about even if you're a relatively small org and a relatively small team, even if you're a solo admin. You can pull from some of the principles that are here and make it work and make your life easier. So the second point is it's phased based on project size. You should grow into this. You should be increasing your maturity. And as the importance of Salesforce grows in your company, then the maturity of your implementation should grow. And yes, it takes investment, but there is a massively positive ROI, which is how well your sales force spend the ROI on that. This is underpinning that investment. So this shouldn't be a nice to have. If you're spending money on Salesforce, which is I'm assuming you are, because that's why you listen to this, you need to make sure you get the best ROI, and having the principles of COE in place will make sure you accelerate that. The last company I ran, we had a pretty big company and a huge spend on Salesforce. At no point did Adrian, our COO, begrudge spending money on Salesforce because we got so much value from it. That should be the way that your project sponsor feels. Happy to write the check because we get such a positive ROI. Happy that we are driving changes at a pace to support the business. That's the sort of conversations that we should be having about not, I can't afford to spend any more money because we spent so much on Salesforce. No, we are getting so much benefit. We need to be doubling down, looking where else we should be using Salesforce. If you've got the licenses and then you build a whole new app using custom objects and all those users are using it and you've pulled them out of Excel spreadsheets or some other app you were using, no more cost in terms of licenses, some cost in terms of build, but suddenly, and then you also have the benefit of everything connected. Guess it may take effort, but again, the COE will start to make sure that that effort is well managed. So there can be a very positive ROI in terms of a COE. Some resources there. The COE Lounge, it's a monthly discussion. We have 3 of those a month on East Coast time, Pacific time, and Europe. You choose which time you want. It's not you have to be on the West Coast to come to the Pacific time one. It's at 3 different time zones. You choose the one that works best. It's a discussion, often led with a particular topic of discussion, but there's no products. There is no product discussion. It's all about the principles of a COE. It's heads of COE, it's CRM owners, who are coming. So there's a click there. Click there to invite, or go to elements.cloud/COE, and that will be and you can get to it. So by the way, this deck will be shared with everybody with all the links. So where it says join with those links, you'll be able to click on those. There is a COE success community we've just set up. Small group of people, but growing. Again, I was staggered. There was no success community for COE, no public-facing one. So we've created that as a place where people can have discussions. Again, no products, all about discussion. And there's a COE LinkedIn group. Obviously, I referenced that 10K Advisors project to program report. And the last thing on the list I haven't talked about, we're talking about your org implementation maturity. And we created something called Org Assessment. 62 questions, takes about 20 minutes, and it will give you a benchmark, a report that says this is how good you are on each of these different aspects. Quick to do it now, do it in 6 months' time, do it in a year's time, and start to see the growth. Use that as a tactical weapon with your CRM owner. This is where we are great, this is where we need investment. Look, here's this benchmark, and look at this area here. We're doing an awful job there. Not me, just the way it's working. We need investment in training or in tools or in support in this area. So use that org assessment as a way of very impartially going, this is where we stand. So thank you very much for joining Best Run Orgs, COE Lounge. Please come and join, Centre of Excellence, please come and join us at the COE Lounge or on the Success Community or the LinkedIn group, and let's continue this discussion. I'm keen to get as much input from everyone as possible, so as we start to build out this COE resource, which will ultimately turn into a book, that we have made sure that we've got everyone's input, everyone's perspective, everyone's experiences in there, so we can build the best resource for managing a COE.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.